Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Cadaver, The Age of the Offended, out July 21st on Nuclear Blast. The album has 13 tracks, 42 minutes in length, and this is the band's 6th full-length studio album. They are a Norwegian death metal band. From a design point of view, this album starts in the right way. It starts with an intro track, and when you have a record that has this sort of heaviness, this sort of aggression, having an intro track is the perfect way to allow the listener to tip its toes into the water and get into the overall experience of listening to the album. You're not forced into it, you're kind of able to walk into it. This increases the engagement that the listener will have with the overall album, and it also increases the overall playability of the record because it gets you on the right foot. Perfect way to get started. The problem is a record like this, a record with this sound, with this experience, this condensed, really needed two more songs like it, two interludes if you will, that would help break the album into 3 different parts. I honestly feel like that would give not only playability to the overall record, but it would allow the album to be a little bit more enjoyable, and it would give the listener a chance to manage the experience of the album as a whole a lot better. The way that it is, it becomes a little bit too much to carry across 13 songs for any listener. You want the album to be enjoyable, you want the album to be manageable, because you want playability to be there so that when you reach the last song, you're ready to go back to the first one. When you don't have those sorts of breaks, when you don't have those sorts of pauses within an album, it makes the experience a little bit more cumbersome. And that's exactly how this record comes across from a design point of view. As far as the sound is concerned, like I said, this is a heavy, aggressive, meaty, but also a very dark sounding album. That darkness is there in the sound, but it's also there in the vocal performance. You can't deny it. It definitely feels a more somber album than I was expecting coming in. I was expecting to be aggressive, balls to the wall, very heavy, very powerful, very brutal, but I was not expecting that sort of darkness to creep in almost in every single song, giving each track a little bit of its own eerie fingerprint. It adds more texture, it adds more quality to the tracks, and definitely adds a different kind of dimension to what you're going to get out of this album. But the overall sound of this record is really interesting because while being a very big sounding record with a lot of aggression, with a lot of thickness, a lot of heaviness, it's an album that doesn't necessarily compress it all and provided it to you in this very tight format. This album has within itself, within its own sound, a lot of room to breathe. It's an album that has a lot of texture, a lot of layers, and you're able to see all of them because they're not pressed against one another. They actually have some gaps in between them that make the sound experience a little bit different, a little bit more approachable, if you will. What makes that experience? What creates this depth? For me, is the combination of 2 elements and how far apart they are from one another and what one gives to the next. And that is the bass, the sound of the bass, where it is in the mix, and the impact that it has in the overall guitar sound. And let's face the facts, this is a guitar-centric record. The guitars are the spinal cord of this record without a shadow of a doubt. But I want to start off with the bass because I honestly felt like the bass work on this album is really interesting. It's interesting because it sounds great, and it's interesting because it has a very deep impact, even though it comes across more as a nuance than anything else. But the sound is powerful. It's a sound that comes through, not necessarily in your face, not necessarily in the forefront, but if you're looking for it, if you're trying to listen to it, it's definitely there. And it has a nice impact because it matches really well with what you're getting from the drums. It matches really well with the overall drum experience all around. And it kind of pulls that part of the sound back at times and also allows it to be big at others. But it always moves in the opposite direction of where the guitars are going. And this is an album that guitar-wise, it has a lot of life. It doesn't have a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not just heavy and thick with big riffs. No, this is an album that offers some moments in where you feel like the guitars are a little bit thinner, a little bit more driven, with more of a sense of purpose, with more direction, and sometimes a little bit more eclectic, a little bit more out of the box. You could call them psychedelic at times, you could call them progressive at times, but it definitely pushes the boundaries of what you would expect from a Cadaver album and definitely from a death metal record. So there's a lot of life, there's a lot of internal movement and the guitar sound, not just from song to song, but within songs themselves. It's a record that never really sits still as far as what the guitars are offering and what the guitars are given. But the combination of the overall guitar sound, the eclectic nature within a death metal album, of course, but the eclectic nature that they have, and the impact and the distance that they have between that and the bass sound, to me becomes the key factor in the overall soundscape of this record. The way those two elements coexist with one another and how one impacts the other are definitely the backbone of everything that you're going to get out of this album. And that is not to say that, for example, the drums don't sound great, because they do. A lot of the heaviness on this album also is defined by the drum sound. The drum sound is just balanced. It just feels cohesive. It feels right at the right times, for the right songs, with the right momentums. So it's so good and so right in every single way that it doesn't shine, it doesn't come through, because it's just perfect. When something is perfect and something is in the right place at the right time, it doesn't really pique your interest, because it just feels that gap that needed to be filled. And that's exactly what the drums are across this entire album. Perhaps too perfect, but the nuances of sound really comes down once again to that bass work, how it sounds, how it moves, how it's mixed, and how it impacts the overall eclecticness, if you will, of the guitars. Vocally, it's a very Ravenous styled record. Not that I was expecting anything else. This is Cadaver, so it comes across in that same fashion. It didn't surprise me one way or another. It was very consistent, and all obviously gave heaviness and aggression to the songs. But perhaps where it surprised me a little bit is in that darkness that I mentioned earlier is also present in the vocal approach. I like a lot of the layers that they use. It definitely gave depth to the vocals, because there's a lot of depth in the layers of the sound as well. So it allows you to feel like things are a little bit more uniform across all the different elements. Overall, big guitar sounding album. That is definitely one of the things that everybody will talk about when it comes down to this record. I'm not going to sit here and say this is their best record to date, but it's one of their best, if not the best, guitar sounding album to date. That I have zero doubts. Now, if this is going to be their strongest album, well, we'll have to wait and see. I think there are some weak points here and there throughout this record. Like I said, the design lacking a few interludes, and also being a little bit more diverse outside of the guitars, not depending just on the guitars for a little bit of diversity, to not have the album be as condensed as it is. Those are two of the weaker points of this record, but guitar-wise, all around, it's definitely the most impactful album that they have done. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Death Revealed. The guitars are very driven, very direct, and then the drums add a lot of volume and a lot of heaviness. This gives this heaviness on the drum sides, or the drums taking a little bit more of the weight on their shoulders as far as heaviness is concerned, definitely allows the guitars to have a little bit more movement, a little bit more freedom, to be a little bit more diverse. The bass presence grounds the song, and that creates the gap that exists in terms of where the guitars can go to the edge of their limit and where the rest of the sound sits. The vocals with the layers bring that darkness into the forefront. It also gives heaviness as well. This gives overall the track a sense of balance, but also a sense of explosion, because there's some parts in this song that both sound and vocals become a little bit more brutal than everything else before and everything else after, and then you start to see the ebbs and flows, and you start to see the movement that the track has, allowing the guitars to really dictate the direction that the song takes, in becoming the spinal cord, without a shadow of a doubt, throughout the entire track. Next you have The Drowning Man. Now this is a more methodic song. It's a song that moves in a very slow pace format, and that allows the track to feel heavy, but also it allows the guitars to have a different impact, a little bit more pounding at times, not necessarily cutting through as much as in some of the previous songs on the record, and even some of the songs that come after this one. This track has unique characteristics to it. The drums are heavy, the drums have an impact, the vocals are very consistent from start to end. It has some layers in it, and those layers really give a little bit of extra texture to how the song comes about. But having a little bit of depth in terms of where the drums are with the bass and where the guitars sit, allows you to feel like the song has volume, it has thickness, it has heaviness, but it carries it well. It just carries it slowly. It just moves very slow as it progresses all the way along. I also like the fact that the guitars feel a little bit more narrow. It's a song where the drums expand a little bit, the bass expands a little bit, they create the boundaries of the song, but they almost squeeze in the guitars in the middle, which is different from different tracks, which I felt like overall this album had more songs where the guitars were at the top, drums and bass are at the bottom, and then there's a gap between them. This song is a little bit different. They kind of circle the wagons around the guitars, squeezing them in, making them feel a little bit more narrow. This also adds to that more methodic vibe that the overall track has. Last but definitely not least, Deadly Metal. Now, great tempo to this song. It almost feels like a grindcore style track in terms of the sound, the aggression, the shortness of the track, how it comes at you, not holding back. It very penetrating. It just has a lot of great elements to it. It has a great drum foundation, but it also has a lot of energy and a lot of life in the guitars. And it has a solo that just breathes life, that breathes energy, that breaks away a little bit from the model of the song. When you listen to this track, if you remove the solo from it, like I said, it feels like a grindcore style song, more sound, because the vocals come in with a more traditional death metal approach, but sound-wise it really feels like a grindcore song. And then you infuse the vocals with that death metal style. The solo comes in more as an old school death metal solo. There's a lot of different caveats to this track, but overall the movement, the tempo, the energy that the song has is definitely something that stays and makes the track memorable. Also, being short doesn't hurt. It has a quick impact, but a lasting one as far as the listener is concerned, of course. This is it. Cadaver with The Age of the Offended, out July 21st on Nuclear Blast. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.